And joining us now, Norm Rubin, Director of Nuclear Research at Energy Probe. And it's nice to have you back in that chair, Norm.
Good to be back, Steve.
Just to let you know, you are the third of three guests we've had this week on the agenda on the issue of nuclear power, apropos of what's happening in Japan, obviously. The head of Bruce Power was here. The former chief engineer of AECL was here. We know where they're coming from on this issue. Where are you coming from on nuclear power?
Steve, I call myself a reformed pro-nuke. I started out pro-nuclear probably through university, maybe thereafter. I still thought this was the way of the future. And I slowly convinced myself by learning more about it that at least the way we've been going about it and are still going about it, I think the whole thing's a mistake and we really shouldn't have. We shouldn't have put a bunch of reactors near Toronto. We shouldn't have used these kinds of designs of large reactors. We shouldn't think that engineered safety systems can compete with inherent safety where the laws of nature are working against us.
Okay, we know that other countries around the world, as we suggested in the intro, are rethinking nuclear now. Who knows for how long, but certainly right now they are. This province, is at a moment in its history where it may or may not, in the near or, midterm future, spend tens of billions of dollars with new nuclear build. How do you see what's happened in Japan changing the conversation here in Ontario about what we ought to do?
I think there are multiple pathways for this Fukushima experience to change the reality around the world. For one thing, this is an industry that has been surviving with its hand in our pockets. The more upset we are with it, the more we're going to grab that hand and take it out of our pockets. The more in love we are with it, the more we're going to say, well, boys will be boys, there's subsidies everywhere. So that's one way. Another way is what I call the fashion of safety regulation. When we decide whether a tsunami is worth protecting against, whether some earthquake bigger than 6.5 is worth putting into the design basis or not, we're making trade-offs, and we make the same kinds of trade-offs here in Ontario. We make those trade-offs, and it's money and nuisance versus safety, usually against some unlikely set of events. And you get people in the room saying, come on, are you kidding? Are you serious? You really want us to spend X dollars to protect against something that we've calculated, or something that's never happened in recorded history? Well, that's exactly what's threatening now, is something that's never happened in recorded history. So, and then you get old plants where you say, you really want us to shut down for a year so that we can rebuild the system that seemed good enough when we built the thing, and take the Pickering reactors closest to Toronto. They've got like 5-10 years left max. How much are you going to invest? How long do you want to shut them down to try to bring them up to the standards we now know are what we should have done in the first place?
Well, here's what a few other countries are doing. Switzerland apparently has suspended approvals on 3 new reactors. Germany has made 7 of its 17 nuclear power stations idle. China, which had this huge nuclear build program in place, has suspended approval for plants across the country for now. Do you think Ontario should be considering something similar?
Absolutely. And you can add to your list, President Obama just made a speech in which he said he wants the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the U.S. to do a complete review. We're not sure exactly what that means, but the reality in Japan of something that was considered incredible happening and turning bad, and we don't know how bad yet, just changes what I call the fashion of designing. It becomes fashionable to say, let's protect against things no matter how unlikely. That's what happened after Chernobyl. The designer of Pickering used that phrase. That's a phrase that you wouldn't have heard a month ago. You'd get laughed out of the room if you said, let's do that.
Well, let me try a yes, but here. Here's from Slate magazine from a couple of days ago. This is how we deal with tragedies in the oil business. Accidents happen, people die, pollution spreads. We don't abandon oil. We study what went wrong, try to fix it, and move on. Contrast this with the panic over Japan's reactors. For 40 years, they've quietly done their work. 3 days ago, they were hit almost simultaneously by Japan's worst earthquake and one of its worst tsunamis. Not one reactor container has failed. The only employee who has died at a Japanese nuclear facility since the quake was killed by a crane. Despite this, Voices are rising in Europe and the United States to abandon nuclear power. Industry analysts predict that the Japan scare, like Chernobyl, will freeze plant construction. Let's cool this panic before it becomes a political meltdown. What do you think?
Well, I don't think anybody's panicking. The question is, do we want to take time to stop and think? And that's what the Chinese are doing, that's what the Germans are doing, that's what the Swiss are doing, that's what the Americans are doing, that's what Ontario should do. Take time to stop and think, look things over, decide what to do. I'm not saying we should shut down Pickering today just in case. You know, let's think about that. Let's see how badly this goes. Let's see how much things are in common. But we're running those plants in part based on a kind of grandfather clause that says it would be too expensive to bring them up to new plant standards. The seismic risk thing, very direct, is a trade-off. Heck, we've got a prime minister in Canada who stood in front of Parliament and said there will be no earthquake. In response, this was when he was firing our regulator, who was insisting on a seismically qualified backup power supply for the pumps. Well, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something you might need if there's an earthquake? Heck yes, we know that this week. There will be no earthquake. He got away with it. He's considered a political genius and may get a majority. There's probably somebody in Japan who said there will be no tsunami. He may end up in jail. The difference is luck.
Okay, I hear you, but you know, the reality is you can't plan for every single eventuality, right? But these plants seem to have done what they were supposed to have done when the earthquake hit. It's the tsunami that's causing the problems.
You know, Chernobyl was doing what it was supposed to do.
That's a totally different design.
No, but I'm saying it had so many good days. 3 Mile Island had a sister plant. I've got an ad that the designer of the other 3 Mile Island plant ran, and they said, we want to introduce you to the kind of plant that doesn't make the news, a smooth running plant. In this field, with this quantity of toxins that wants to get out if you let it, nobody remembers your good days if you had a bad day, and I think that's rational. One of the issues here is not just will there be a nasty industrial accident, the question is will the evacuees be able to come back home? We don't get that from oil spills. That's not a problem you get from most industrial accidents, floods, tsunamis. Eventually you rebuild your town, you go back. Radiation accidents, you get some cesium blowing in the wind, you don't get to come back home. That's different.
Okay, but you'd acknowledge that Japan sits on plates that Ontario does not.
Sure.
You'd acknowledge that the likelihood of Ontario experiencing the kind of quake or tsunami that Japan just did is infinitesimal.
Sure, no tsunamis on Lake Ontario, I'll grant you that.
Correctamundo. In which case, you know, you can overlearn the lessons of something else if the criteria are not applicable. Are the criteria of what's gone on in Japan applicable for the province of Ontario?
That's the trade-off question. And I'm just saying that most normal people have an idea of safety, especially for something like a nuclear plant, that is binary. It's safe, it isn't safe. And there's no gray area. I'm saying the world lives in a gray area. Get used to it. If you can't live with that, with nuclear generating stations being in a trade-off where we decided to protect up to a point. You know, there's a phrase in this industry that most people don't understand what it could mean. It's called beyond design basis. Beyond design basis. What does it mean? It means we guesstimate the amount of shaking, the nastiness of the saboteur, the frequency of spontaneous failures of equipment. We guesstimate all of that and put it into the design. But we acknowledge there will be weeks like this one when things go past that. So we have conferences to discuss beyond design basis accidents. What if what's really the worst thing we can imagine happens? They like to make us think that they've designed to the worst thing they can imagine. Heck no.
All right, let me ask you one last thing. And that is, you told us earlier you don't believe, as a result of what's happened in Japan, we need to go out to Pickering tomorrow and shut the plant down. What do we need to do right now?
You know, that's a very good question, and I think we need to look seriously at the life extension for Pickering A and B, where we're planning to spend money to keep 2 reactors at Pickering A that are raising our electricity rates going. I don't know why we're doing that. I don't know why we're still running them. They're the oldest plants. We're the only country outside of Japan, I think, that likes to build 4 in a row like ducks. And we know how nasty that can be this week. We, unlike the Japanese, like to share a bunch of our safety systems. So we built a vacuum building as the key of our containment system at Pickering that is now servicing the 6 remaining reactors and is sized for 1 accident.
Okay, but what do we need to do as a province this week? We're not going to shut down Pickering. We're not going to shut down Bruce. What do we need to do?
I'll tell you what I would like to do. I would like to get rid of the Nuclear Liability Act that is protecting the owners and operators of all of our nuclear plants against liability, against responsibility for their actions. Get rid of that, put companies with deep pockets standing behind them, let General Electric or some other big company take responsibility. If they think it's safe enough and they're willing to pay the bills, then I'll live with it.
Against catastrophic whatever.
Exactly. Let them hold the bag, because right now the federal government is holding the bag, the victims are holding the bags, the people who understand this the best are scared and won't stand behind it. You have a voice coming from inside the concrete bunker saying, don't worry about the bullets. When you ask them to come out, they say it's comfortable in here. No, and in fact, when you sue them to get them to come out, as Energy Probe did, they fight you with every legal trick in the book and the fanciest lawyers in Canada to make sure they stay inside the bunker just in case.
Okay, Norm. Good to have you here on our show again. Thanks so much. That's Norm Rubin from Energy Probe.